Greetings from Thailand and Happy New Year. My name is Daniel James Hudson, a viola player, and I'm with my very good friend, a composer, Marcus Tristan. And we want to talk to you about a new piece of music that Marcus has written for myself to play solo viola with an orchestra. And Marcus, could you just introduce for us your piece, please?
Yes, good evening and Happy New Year to everybody from Thailand. I've written a piece as part of a large, how would you describe it, a large hyper-composition called Ecliptic Observations, which is basically, the ecliptic is the line of constellations through which the sun passes as it goes through round, well, it doesn't go around the Earth goes around the sun, obviously. But there are 14 constellations on the ecliptic, and for this piece I've chosen 9 nebulae, star clusters. There's a black hole, there are no galaxies in this one, that feature in one of those 14 constellations. Now you may wonder why there are only 9, because I didn't finish it yet. Basically, there are going to be 5 more in the future, but this is the finished piece at the moment. And it starts in Taurus, which is the bull, and it ends in Cetus, which is the whale or the sea monster. And this is a constellation through which the sun passes for only a few hours every year, but still it's on the ecliptic.
Okay, thank you very much. Very recently I recorded the solo viola part independently on my own, and we've combined it with the orchestral soundtrack. And the next stage that we thought would be very interesting to develop was a fusion of music and images. And in the last few days we've been very busy doing that with all 9 compositions from some notable clusters, the title of this new piece. And we've timed it intentionally so that we can present it to the world and as many of our friends and colleagues as possible for this brand new year that we're just about to enter, 2021. So it has a special meaning for us in terms of the timing of doing this project. And we generally feel, Marcus showed me the music and I obviously got to know it over the course of weeks and the recent months, that it's really a truly original piece. And the writing for my instrument, the viola, certainly has taken me into new territory, some familiar territory which I've encountered in other contemporary music, but there are new elements in this which have made me extremely excited about developing this project. This talk now, we're going to take you through the 9 pieces which make up some notable clusters. Each one has its own theme, of course, referring to a different nebula in the ecliptic. And we're going to theme this as it were, an association of music and image. And the first piece is called Pleiades. Very, very briefly, could you just explain the Pleiades in terms of its place in the universe?
Absolutely, yes. The one thing first to note, if I may, is that the title, Some Notable Clusters, is actually is a play on words, because notable obviously means noteworthy, or worthy of note, but notable in this case also means I've turned them into notes. So some notable clusters. So,
yes.
For example, the Pleiades, the first one, the Pleiades is a very visible to the naked eye cluster of stars in the the constellation of Taurus, the bull. And what I did was superimpose onto a kind of, it was like music paper, but I superimposed the stars, most of the stars that I could find, not just the visible ones, but also ones you can't see with the naked eye, and threaded a melodic line through the cluster. You can't just do them all together in music because that would just be a mess. So it's like the melodic lines that the stars make as you trace them through the sky, if you like. And that works in the same way with constellations too. I do that with a constellation. It's not a 100% original idea, because back in 1992, I think it was, I worked on a performance of Sternklang by Karl-Heinz Stockhausen, and was lucky enough to work briefly with him on it. He came to the performance to organise it, and he did the same thing, putting the picture of the stars onto music lines and making a melody. But what he didn't do, I believe, which I do, is then I rotated them, and of course that changes the rhythmic relationship between each star as a melody. So it's like rotation is a big theme, musical idea in this piece. But the Seven Sisters were seven kind of muses of legend, Greek legend. I can't remember all of them. Alcyone, Atlas. There are seven of them, but you can only see 6 of the stars with your naked eye. And it's in the second constellation of the it's now the third constellation as the sun passes around the ecliptic. It starts with Aquarius now. It used to be Aries, then Aries, and then Taurus.
Right, okay, thank you very much. Thanks for the enhanced description of, for example, how the pitch selection is done in a process such as this. I knew a little bit about that before, but actually just hearing you describe that again, I get a little bit more insights. And as we all know as performers, working with composers who we either know, or more often, to be honest, don't know, because I'm very fortunate in this case to be collaborating directly with Marcus, the composer of this piece. It's a well-known fact that we learn the notes. We don't always have a full appreciation of how they are put together. Modern composers of any distinction, by definition, have their own ways of working, their own methods. And so there's no one textbook where, for example, serialism, and most musicians know the mechanics of that. That might be one approach, but certainly we're aware that there are any number of approaches, and that's certainly shed some light on that for me. Yes, the Seven Sisters was the image in the video which we developed. And after we've talked through all 9 of these, by the way, we're going to be presenting the 9 videos in order, which last approximately 45 minutes, maybe a little bit longer. And the one image we didn't use in this first piece was the Taurus, which is associated with the bull, which is something we could have done. But when we're working in this sort of format, very often one association and one image does the trick and conveys, not always, but often.
Well, we came up with this phrase, which I think is quite a useful way for people who have no into the music yet, to describe how the works, not just musically, but the video production, is the aesthetics of association. It's a good phrase. I think you came up with that phrase. And it means that we could have made all 9 videos in a completely different way, in a different setting. For example, you didn't mention this, but you remarked on it earlier, we could even have had the Seven Sisters tube line sign from the London...
From the Piccadilly line in London, right.
Another association. Yes. So what I've always attempted to do with videos with my music is to give people who don't really get necessarily what the music is about immediately, or even over a long period, into it by using images which maybe help them to associate ideas.
Yes.
So the aesthetics of association, I think, is a very good phrase that you came up for this.
Yes, absolutely. And we truly felt that applies to this whole project.
Yeah.
And the videos, I think it applies to them all, so it's worth mentioning, as we were talking about the first one, are in a sense vignettes of a sort. They last between 3 and 5 minutes each. So they're not miniatures as such, but certainly I think we regard them as vignettes, and almost something which could be presented as installation art, as well as being performed live. We certainly plan to perform this piece as a live show in the not too distant future, but they would work, having done them as videos, as I say, pieces which could be run in museums or spaces of various kinds, where they could be observed as mini films. They don't tell stories as such, but because of the aesthetics of association and any number of things that an image can trigger in somebody's memory, I think they'd work extremely well with respect in that respect.
Can I make another point on that?
Yeah.
Because you talked about vignettes, and they really are vignettes, because if a complete live performance would actually be quite considerably longer than what we've made, because the way the piece is constructed is that each bar, inverted commas, is one page of music, and over that page each member of the orchestral ensemble and the soloist work their way through that page, rather like those going through the stars of the Pleiades, to the end. And when they've got to the end, they wait until the next bar. It's like another breath. It's like a series of breaths.
Mm-hmm.
So a live performance will be much less tight than the performances we've made for these videos.
Right.
If you like.
Yes.
And each performance will be subtly different, although recognisable. It's like a kind of planned aleatory, which is like music of chance but not. It's chance but not. A bit like Feldman's chance music, more than John Cage's chance music. So,
Yes.
so the pieces definitely work as a structure, but what's 3 minutes on the recording with the video might well be 5 minutes when it actually comes to a live recording. So
Yeah.
the live recording will be more of an expansive thing.
Mm.
But this is a really good, we've done, I think, a fairly good job of giving a very good idea of what it might be like in a real live performance.
Absolutely, yes. And the fact that I, as I said, the first stage of doing this presentation in terms of the videos was this recording of the solo viola on its own. So I performed obviously for a camera, but I very much felt from the beginning that it had to be performed with absolute conviction. And the energy level I felt of the music starts right at the beginning, and I think a piece like this will absolutely depend upon maintaining that energy throughout, in this case, as you said, around 45 minutes, possibly even longer than that.
Can I make another point on that one? Because we were talking earlier about how Mozart would write a piano concerto, and he'd write the parts for the orchestra, but he himself in his mind knew the piano part, so he didn't bother to write it down until later when maybe somebody else wanted to perform it. This piece has worked exactly the opposite way around. I wrote the viola part first, knowing basically what was going to be happening around it, but didn't write that yet until I'd given you the whole viola part. All 9 parts, I think, were basically finished before I'd finished the score.
Yes.
So this is like the opposite of the Mozart thing. So I knew what the score was going to be like, but I wrote the viola part first. Does that make any sense?
It makes absolute sense, yes. And again, every composer will have their different methods about what comes first, the way that they might fill in either the bass line at a later stage, and so on. And we're all aware of that as performers. Can we move on now to the second piece?
Yes.
In some notable clusters.
Before you do move on,
yes,
just a final thing. We came up with a little phrase for each piece that we thought summed it up.
Yes, that's right.
On
yes,
a deeper level rather than just a musical jargon and techniques and whatever. And this one, I think it was something like the birth of the arousal of the senses or something like that.
I think the arousal of the senses.
The arousal of the senses.
The arousal of the senses. So,
which makes me think that this whole piece, in this format of 9 sections, is like a birth to death piece. We'll come to that later, but this is the thing.
You mean from the first movement to the last movement?
Yeah, because the
from 1
baby,
to 9.
when he's born,
Yes.
or she is born,
Okay, yes.
the first thing they kind of get to know is their senses, and so this is like the first piece in a life to death piece, if you like.
Yes, that's right. Yes, indeed. Yes, that's quite right. So the arousal of the senses, I believe, and we wanted a short phrase with not too many words, maybe not a full sentence, which summed up the way we felt about these individual clusters.
Yeah, clusters.
And moving on to the second piece now, this is called the Medusa Nebula, Gemini, and each one has a very distinct character, and of course the constellations and the night sky that we look at have been assigned these names by various scientists and historians through the ages, and in themselves, by their very nature, have very different images that they conjure up in our mind. So the Medusa Nebula, can you just give a brief description of visually what that represents in the sky?
Yes, the Medusa Nebula is a diffuse gaseous nebula. It's a gas which is lit up by stars being born, if I remember right. But the interesting thing about this piece is that Medusa, of course, is the Greek, she's not a hero, she's the Greek character who has the famous head of snakes, and her stare
The
turns,
wild crone.
Yeah, exactly. Stare turns you to stone. But a Medusa, I think in Latin, definitely in Russian, is a jellyfish. And of course the jellyfish has all these tentacles coming off the bottom, which is like the snaky hair. So this is the image that dominates this particular section.
Yes.
But there's one thing to say quickly about that I didn't mention about the ecliptic, is that of course this is the Medusa Nebula in Gemini, and I was brought up thinking that I was born in Gemini because that's when my birthday is. But actually, if you look at the real place where the sun is on the ecliptic, I wasn't born in Gemini at all. And in fact, there are 14 constellations around what people call the zodiac. And Scorpius, for example, the sun is only in Scorpius for 7 days, and then there's this huge gap for the constellation Ophiuchus, which we'll come to later, where nobody's born under Ophiuchus, are they? You don't hear somebody say, "Oh, I'm an Ophiuchus."
No, I've never heard that.
The sun is actually in Ophiuchus for something
Particular
like
phrase,
17 days. So
even a reference to that part of the universe. No,
and
this is
Cetus
a new
as
one
well.
to me as well.
Cetus, 1 day.
Yes.
If you're born on March the 14th, you're actually a Cetus. You're not a Pisces.
Right. Yes. Yeah.
And Pisces isn't anywhere in that place anymore.
Well, needless to
Sun,
say,
moon.
I mean, the space, I mean, you could say, is an infinitely complex place.
Infinite.
Certainly, it's certainly verging on that. If there is an end to the universe, well, it might not be absolute, but how do we know?
But is there a restaurant there at the end of the
Well,
universe?
and that's the thing, we don't know. And I mean, a central aspect of this, as with, there happens to be a particular place at the end. We simply don't know the answers to the big questions. That's an underlying theme, of course, about this piece. And we'll talk more about that, I think, as we talk about the other movements, that aspect of unanswered questions.
Yes.
And so with this video, we came up with a very different feel. And when we looked through this, we came up with a phrase that summed it up, which was frozen state of hysteria. I think frozen state of hysteria because of the Medusa element. She's the monster with a head of snakes, which will turn you to stone if she catches your gaze, if she stares at you, as we know. And so therefore, if that did ever happen, and of course we see in movies and literature that it is, it is one of these stories which has been conveyed many times. You would at once be frozen in a state, even if it was as stone, but you'd still have awareness. You wouldn't be dead, and so hence the hysteria, the sheer fear of encountering. And of course, I mean, subject matter like that in any art is, of course, very powerful and very effective.
Well,
it's not I wouldn't describe this as a mini horror movie. There's one later on in the cycle which maybe is, but this one, the first one was really the Seven Sisters. It was really certainly an unthreatening one, whereas straight in with number 2 with Medusa, it does have that element, and we developed that in the video, I think, didn't we?
yes, in fact, this is a horrific state of being, which actually, if you've ever seen the film Awakenings, about the psychologist Oliver Sacks, these people go into a completely catatonic state for decades, and then he found a drug that woke them up for a short period of time, and then they went back into this catatonic state, and they were aware for those 40, 50 years what was going on around them, but they couldn't do anything. It's like Pushkin's Stone Guest, he's a statue, but he's stuck inside, he's a person stuck inside a statue not being able to move.
Yes, yeah.
Or it's like the Ice Queen in the one with the wardrobe, the children in the wardrobe, what's it called?
The Lion, the Witch and the Wardrobe. The Lion, the Witch and the Wardrobe.
Those statues that the Ice Queen freezes, they're still alive inside. And then, of course, coming in contemporary, it's the Weeping Angels in Doctor Who, isn't it? These.
Yes, and so on. Yes,
and then
absolutely.
they move when they're not being watched.
Yes.
So it's actually quite a horrific idea.
Yeah.
So this frozen state of hysteria, you'd be going absolutely berserk in there, wouldn't you?
Yeah.
Imagine stuck like that. Imagine us all stuck in our homes during lockdowns. It's worse than that. You can't go out. You're stuck.
That terrible feeling, and as I say, as the performer, in this case, the solo viola part that I'm playing, and we've gotten to know the music that Marcus has written intimately. Again, in this piece, as in all the others, you captured the feeling that you just described very effectively in musical terms.
It's kind of a horror thing.
Yes, there's also there's a mini horror. So there's one later on which we'll talk about, which I think is the horror movie of this sequence. But it's certainly not far from that. Yeah. And from a technical point of view, some of the effects that composer Marcus has written for the viola, in terms of the Bartok pizzicato effect, which is nothing new, of course, but it never loses its power in terms of literally the snap of the sound of a string going onto a fingerboard, combined with sul ponticello playing on the bridge technique, which creates an eerie texture, of course, very well known, and so on. Yes, I thought that we did very well with this video, and having done the first two, my mission was to try and achieve the same level with all of them. Going on to number 3 now. So
can I quickly say before we go to number 3 that I've always been interested in making new techniques, new forms, new ways of writing in every piece. Much in the same way that every piece of Beethoven is something new. It's not like I'm going to repeat myself. I want to create new techniques of playing, new ways of putting sounds together. And you've even said to me recently that I wrote down something that caused you to find a new way of playing the viola that you think has never been done before. So I'm always interested in doing that. And Xenakis once gave a piece to an organ player and said, see what you can make of that. Basically, I know you'll never get it right, probably nobody can, but see what you can make of it.
Right,
see how
it'll be your
how
own
you can do with that one.
Unique, yes.
So I'm very pro Xenakis in
Right.
in this and many other ways.
Yeah, so we do say Xenakis is probably a primary influence, obviously, in composition in general.
Yeah, I was lucky enough to meet him and do some master classes with him when I was at the academy, and yes, he has had a strong influence without any doubt. I love the
I
way he
know
uses
a
sound.
certain amount of Xenakis, but I'm certainly not the whole.
Sometimes I use stochastic techniques.
But I recognise elements from. I mean, maybe not in terms of the style of the music itself, but the general aesthetic is, to use that word again, of
So that
your creating mind is coming from.
I interrupted you.
No,
I
okay.
just wanted to add that.
Thank you. So the third one is Praesepe, which is known as the beehive, and that's also known as M44, which refers to the astronomer Charles Messier, who catalogued the constellations in the night sky.
And he catalogued the nebulae and galaxies.
Okay, so
he was an 18th century or early 19th century astronomer, and he was the first one to see that these weren't stars, they were something else. There are nebulae double stars, there are galaxies, there are planetary nebulae, that they're not stars.
Right.
And he wrote the first book, and there are 109 objects in there, and this is number 44 in this
okay, right, okay, thank you. And also associated with Cancer, Praesepe, and so for this we did actually use 2 images, that of the beehive and bees, and also Cancer as in crabs. So crabs on the beach and bees in their beehives are the 2 main visual elements which went to make this video. And again, we felt with this song that we achieved something which was very effective. We came up with just the 2-word phrase for this: nervous vibrations.
Yes.
Nervous as in with the crabs scuttling along a beach in no particular direction and turning it every.
You came up with a very good phrase: buzzing and scuttling. I thought
buzzing and scuttling. That's
very
right.
Buzzy and scuttly sort of piece.
That's right. Yes. And again, the music captures that with I think in this case some tremolo also for the bow technique, and
wide vibrato sort of.
And the vibrato technique, which again, going back to what you were saying about new techniques, and it's one which really I haven't done before. I very often used wide vibrato as a string player, but not quite this wide. And so when I saw the notation on the page, which was effectively, a line, an oscillating line going up and down, but increasing in its height. That suggests to me, obviously, I need to move my finger further up and downwards with each oscillation. And so that turned into more than the vibrato, and actually more of a moving between pitches as far as a minor third or a major third apart, often. And again, that works extremely well in this context. Just to describe animals who is very hard for us to relate to as human beings. I mean, think bees and crabs, I think in a general sense, they're not alien creatures to us, but they might as well be in a sense. It can often appear from a different planet. So just that feeling of, there's a combination of wonder, but also almost some sort of an element of fear as well. Fear of the unknown, something which is so different, but which yet inhabits not only our universe but our planet. So.
Did you mention that Praesepe means the beehive in Latin?
Yes, yes.
And there were just two things that I wanted to add to what you've said, which is excellent. The buzzing and scuttling is, if you watch bees in a hive, they dance around each other to tell other bees where to go to pick up nectar or whatever it is they make honey with. And that sort of movement of the dancing I tried to get in particularly the woodwind parts.
Yes.
The one thing we haven't said, of course, so far is it's an orchestra without strings except the viola. So there's a big woodwind section, a big brass section, a lot of percussion, including some Thai percussion, Thai woodwind instruments from Thailand. So it's not, there's no strings except the viola, which is a good way of making the viola stand out.
Yes.
Because the viola is not the loudest of stringed instruments, but it can be pretty powerful. So no strings, so you can shine against the woodwind and the brass.
Yeah.
But so we've got this dancing patterns from the bees in the woodwind particularly. And also I was sitting on the beach a few months ago, quite a few months ago, because it's written quite a while ago now, and I watched these tiny little crabs scuttering across the beach. That one went that way and that one that way and disappeared into their holes. So I tried to get that sort of playful play of the crabs on the sand. And of course the crab in certain poses can be quite comical, and I think we captured a bit of the humour of the crab in this piece.
Absolutely,
it's not all heavy serious stuff.
At the same time, it's known that the crabs or the crab or crabs themselves are not intending to be comical.
No, of course not.
So that's part that very much part of that effect.
There's one effect in the video where this one stops and looks at you in the camera, which is quite it's comical. And
there's very near the end of this video, there's that moment where the scuttling crab stops mid-screen, looks up at the camera with its two tiny eyes. You have absolutely no idea what it's thinking, except possibly is it feeling threatened? Is it in danger?
Probably. Because
that's really what I think in nature, what life is really all about. Humour aside, I think possibly it is a fact that humans may not be the only members of the animal kingdom which understand what humour is, but we're certainly the ones that have developed that sense of it to any large degree.
Yeah.
I'm just thinking
I wanted to make the point that it's not all heavy serious.
There
are moments of humour in there too.
And the final moment in this video is where that crab that we just talked about disappears into a hole in the sand.
And that's the end of the piece.
Refuge, and that's the end of that video. So that's just fitting into that one. So for just touches of humour there, going on to number 4, I don't think there's anything humorous about this at all. It's a very serious subject matter. It's titled Virgo Black Hole. And actually this one is in 2 parts. The first part of it is Virgo Black Hole, and the second part of it is what lies, we believe, on the other side of that, which is called Bertie's Empty Quarter, which is what's known as a supervoid, I believe. Is that correct? And so this really is just, there's got one theme to it, and that's being sucked into a black hole with that irresistible gravitational force which will tear you apart and do all sorts of things which are no fun at all.
Can you remember what our phrase was for this?
So for this one, yes, I think the all-encompassing power of the anima was this one. So can you just actually describe what anima is and how we came up with this?
Well, the anima is the feminine aspect of the male, isn't it?
Yes.
Like the animus is
in the philosophy of perhaps Freud
or Jung.
And Jung.
It's that Jungian Freudian thing.
Right.
And Virgo, of course, is the Virgin, or the Earth Mother in the sort of ecliptic zodiac as was, and it's all about the power of the feminine in nature. Really, let's not say in the male. It's the feminine in nature, and we all know, of course, that the feminine is much more powerful force in a certain way. They bring forth the new generation, etc. Not without the animus help, but that's the feminine, is the bringing forth of the new generation. But this was written actually at the time, just after the first photograph appeared of a black hole. Of course, Stephen Hawking and many others, Einstein, I believe, even posited that a black hole was a possibility, but it was a few months or a month or so after this was actually photographed by an American lady astrophysicist. Photographed in the sense that the data was made into a photograph. It's not like get out the snapshot and there's a black hole. But she translated the data into a photograph of a black hole the first time ever. And they're everywhere in the universe, but that's why I chose the Virgo black hole, because that was the first one to be imaged.
Right,
So
okay.
imaged,
So,
not photographed.
Yes. So big historical significance.
And
That discovery, yes.
not far away from Virgo, although not actually in the ecliptic, is a constellation called Boötes. And in the direction of the constellation of Boötes, the herdsman, is a massive hole in the universe. Almost nothing exists in this hole. If you go out into the space around us in the planetary system we live in, there are actually quite a lot of particles in the space. It's not empty like people think. But you go to the space in the Boötes supermassive void, it can go down to sort of 10 particles every square kilometre. That's a very small amount of matter.
Yes.
So it's from this
Almost total vacuum, almost complete and utter vacuum.
Almost complete and utter vacuum. So you go from this wrecking, destroying, twisting and warping time and space object in Virgo to this utter nothingness. There's almost nothing in there for thousands of millions of light years.
And again, musically, I think you captured that brilliantly from the first half of this piece, the black hole experience of being sucked into it, and then ending up on the other side, as it were, in a sense, in something which is practical nothingness.
May I ask you a question as the viola soloist?
Yes.
The beginning of this piece, of this Virgo, it has these long notes pressed very hard down on the string, like a grinding, sort of metal grinding sound.
Yes.
And listening to your performance while I was sort of mixing it in with the orchestra, it sounded as if you went a bit warped as well playing it. Did it have this effect on your mind? Like
From a mental point of view, yes, I think so, yes. The visceral power.
Yeah.
I remember thinking of those two words actually almost immediately after I'd listened to your demo that maybe you first sent for me with a sound file.
So
but then when I played it myself,
yeah,
visceral power, and that's, mentally speaking, identified with presumably what I thought must be this huge gravitational force involved in the movement from the very beginning, and in musical terms as well.
Mm-hmm.
Absolutely. And that was Mark's Sul Ponticello, which is on the bridge, and I did this right on the bridge, at a very extreme Sul Ponticello, with as much downward pressure as I could. So in a sense, breaking a lot of the rules of string playing, where the general idea for most of classical music is to make the string vibrate so much that it doesn't need to be pressed or pulled anymore.
Yeah.
But this was a process of sound distortion, which directly reflected the distortion involved in the physics that's involved with this movement. And I think there were 11 of these open C string growls, grinds at the beginning over the course of something like 25 seconds. So the first one would have been about 8 seconds long, and then they got progressively shorter. So maybe 1 second shorter each time, which over the course of 11 filled out about 25 seconds. The effect is absolutely brilliant, and again, that's typical of many of the things I've noticed in this score in general. Just that representation, or what I perceive to be, the musical representation of what I perceive to be what physics were involved. Again, we're talking about a situation where most musicians are not professional physicists or even amateur physicists, of any recognisable level. But we know obviously as much as the next person in terms of general principles. And so that imagination that you attach between musical expression or visual expression and science is something that is just part of the it's part of the mystery of art sometimes also. But conversely, very often scientists are very appreciative of what art has to offer in terms of expressing the laws of the universe, whatever they might be.
Well, I have to trepidatiously mention his name, but I read a book which probably many people have read, called The God Delusion by Professor Richard Dawkins. And he said he doesn't believe in any god or anything like
He's
that.
a pure atheist, isn't
in fact,
he?
he's a very, very ardent atheist. But he once said, "But it doesn't mean I don't like listening to Haydn's Creation or Mozart Piano Concerto. But God seems to have all the best tunes." And I thought at that point, but that doesn't necessarily need to be the case. Why not write music which shows the awe and wonder of the universe without any belief in God or anything? So it was kind of off the cuff remark maybe, but I felt, yeah, he's right. It's very easy in a way to make great music in adoration of religious subjects, but where are the pieces which are in adoration of the glory of creation and the glory of whatever? But there's one thing I wanted to say quickly before we move to the next one, is I have an apology on this Boetti's Empty Quarter piece, because actually this one very important element of a lot of the music I write these days is electroacoustic music. And this comes to the fore in the Boetti's Empty Quarter. It's very empty with these weird ghostly sounds in the void, and you hadn't heard any of that when you actually did the recording, so it was like you went in a bit dry, whereas the Virgo, you knew what it was going to sound like.
Yes.
But you didn't know what it was going to sound, so you couldn't quite...
But I sensed that in the Boetti's, the second part of this, the Boetti's, the Empty Quarter, I certainly sensed the vastness of what was presumably a big empty void. Yeah, that was certainly something which, I think
so apologies for that, but I think it still works.
It absolutely works, and I think this video, I think number 4, I think we regard it as a sort of one of the highlights and perhaps the centerpiece of the 9.
It is.
It's not exactly in the middle,
the center of,
but it feels like the center of gravity, as it were, of some notable clusters. A very powerful piece of music. The next one is called Cat's Paw Nebula, Scorpius. And for this one we came up because of the cats either tamed or wild. We actually used footage which shows cats presumably after they've had a good feast. So they're not in the hunting mode, but they're in the more sleepy mode, and that was something which was again suggested directly by the music. We think this is a very good match of sound and image, and therefore we came up with the 2-word description of this one: soporific contentment.
Yes. Soporific
as in sleepy, and contentment as in well fed. So we developed the cat's paw nebula and the cat association very literally here, very directly. So actually, could you just talk a bit about what the cat's paw nebula looks like through the telescope, because it is an amazing image, isn't it?
It is, yes. In fact, it really does look like a cat's paw, doesn't it? It's like a cat put his paw into the sky, and it's
not just the shapes that stars or lights that we see in the sky make. It actually the colours that come across in the image.
Yeah, so
literally look
like my cat.
They could be a cat's paw.
Gingery, sort of reddish yellow.
Right. Yes.
And yes, it's a nebula. It's like gas. I think it's a place where stars are being born. So it's a coloured thing. It's not like a cluster of stars like Praesepe or Pleiades. It's actually sort of lots of gas, which is coloured, often by the photographers. If you went into space and you got near to it, it probably wouldn't be those wonderful colours.
Partly artist's impression.
Yeah.
Yes.
But I mean, there's only a few things to say really here, because any composer, however unconventional they are, like maybe myself, would never follow something like the Virgo and the Boetti's Empty Quarter with something of similar intensity. So this is like, you called it an interlude.
Almost an interlude after the Virgo
of the
experience.
Soporific contentment.
Right.
Nobody who knows me for more than 5 minutes knows I'm not mad about cats anyway. And
so am I, and of course so many.
So it was a very... very simple.
So many of viewers today, or people everywhere, are cat lovers.
So it's like an intermezzo interlude between.
Yes, and it's shorter. It is
shorter.
Actually maybe around 3 minutes. This
3
one.
Minutes, yeah.
And
in this performance,
but in its own way, equally intense.
Intense, but not.
We start off because of the music. It suggested to me not a domestic cat, but either a lion or a tiger. And we have a fully mature lion, not roaring, but having a big yawn. at the beginning of this sequence.
And it coincides with a really bassy, contrabassoon tuba sound.
That timbre, that combination, which
well.
creates that timbre, matches that absolutely perfectly. One of the things we did, of course, I was using the iMovie video editing application for this project. And we tried to explore as many of the features as we could in it. And one of the main aspects of doing something successfully is pinpoint timing. And so the effect that we just described was effectively one which was carried through every single video, every single piece of music which we wanted to match with a particular visual parallel, if you like, demands pinpoint timing for it to get that full effect. So if you just imagine, the sight of a lion yawning has a certain arc to it, in a very general sense, up and down, in terms of the way that its gesture moves. And again, that's something which the music was suggesting, hence the image. But you've got to time that so that it literally follows that contour.
Yeah.
The contour of the music and the visual contour.
Wrong,
and again, that's the essence, I think, in the entire cycle, what I just described, that applies to every single marrying.
There's humour in this one too, though, of course, because you have this huge lion at the beginning yawning and this big sound, and at the end you've got these two maybe domestic but small cats yawning one after the other. It's like yawning is infectious even in humans, but it seems to be the same in cats.
Yeah.
And this comes at the end, like, so you go from the lion to the two domestic cats yawning. So it's all about some sleepiness and relaxed almost. And I think you mentioned that the viola part is the simplest of all the pieces. And
it is.
Even lies within
it's as effective as all the other pieces. And I say, I regard all of these pieces as equals in terms of music. So in terms of the actual level of expression and the intensity, there isn't any difference there. But from a technical point of view, it was shorter, which is not the overriding reason, but it's mainly I think it all lied in first position on the viola. I was using pretty much standard arco, bowed, detaché, slurred, legato articulation for almost all of it, with a few pizzicato. And so compared with the other movements, which did involve the regular use of a lot more extended techniques.
And microtones. I think this one is more semitonal.
I think that's correct as well. And I think maybe this one is, if not entirely, almost entirely semitonal. Whereas a lot of the other movements is, as Marcus has just said, quarter tonal, microtonal, but using quarter tones, which is something we haven't actually mentioned yet.
No, but
but in the first four movements, for example, there are a few examples of the use of quarter tones, which is part of the style of the compositional process here. But not in this one. But instead of that, what this does have is a lot of slides, which in musical terminology we describe as portamentos or glissandi. Which again, in terms of
sort of laziness,
marrying with the theme, the cat's
cat stretching.
The cat stretching and in this case they're not on the hunting part of their cycle. No. They're in the bit in between.
Well, there is a kitten that sort of looks a bit lost and he's jumping around. So not to forget the kitten, which happens maybe not exactly in the middle of this, but certainly in between the lion and the two domesticized cats at the end. There's a kitten which finds itself on its own hopping around a field of long grass. Presumably it is looking for something of interest, which is usually something which might... and not all of them include the constellation, but there are a couple of moments where Scorpion appears, isn't there?
We do have two, I think it's two images of the Scorpion.
Very desultory, not very...
not moving images, but yes, that's right. One of them which is very effective is at the beginning, where it's actually superimposed upon the image of me performing the viola in my recorded video. I recorded this actually at my place of work in a teaching room, and it's impossible to really describe the look of that right now, but I try to make it resemble somewhat the cockpit of a spaceship, because there are windows behind me when I'm making this recording with daylight coming through, and just various other sort of features which make a very symmetrical looking stage set, if you like. And so we use that to great effect with me centred, in this case with the image of a scorpion appearing, as it were, behind me. And we use that technique a few times in other pieces.
Before we talk about the next one, it has to be said that all of these videos were built around your recording of the whole piece.
Yes, the
solo.
Basic foundation
So
visually.
you're in it in every video playing.
Yes,
and
a constant throughout this is the solo viola. But we used what's known as Ken Burns effect a lot. So i.e. you can zoom in and zoom out to, in this case, myself performing. And it's amazing how many variations you can get within that. Just one person in one room from one camera angle, playing around with the features on even something like iMovie, which is sophisticated but not a fully professional application. It's very impressive. And we had a lot of fun, also satisfaction using these features.
Yeah.
So that was number 5.
Now the horror movie.
Right, well, would you like to introduce this one? So number 6
is...
it was Little Ghost Nebula.
It's called the Little Ghost Nebula, and it's in one of the constellations in the ecliptic that is not in the sort of astrological zodiac. It's the sign of the mythical serpent bearer, Ophiuchus. He's wrestling a serpent in his arms. And the sun is in Ophiuchus for I think it's 14 or 17 days, I can't remember, it's between that number somewhere. And the Little Ghost Nebula, of course, it suggests ghosts, things that go bump in the night, that kind of thing. And I think, if I remember rightly, the very first image is this apparition on some old stairs in an old building.
Yes.
And the whole video has a creepy sort of...
Very creepy.
Very otherworldly sort of feel about it. And I can't remember what phrase we came up for this one, but I remember it was quite a good one.
So this one, being based around the idea of ghouls or ghosts,
Ghoulies
as a principal theme, was petrifying expectations.
Yes,
Petrifying
there's one thing that's very important to mention in this video. At the time that I was writing this particular section, I always have been, but I got even more obsessed with listening to the music of the monks of Bhutan, which is a sort of secretive mountain kingdom in the Himalayas, and the sound of their ritual music. And I didn't try and reproduce it in this particular movement, this section. I don't call them movements, they're sections. But the sort of power of the incantational nature of this music, and they have these big long trumpets which make these big noises, and there's two moments in this particular section where it's like a huge noisy band, as it were, comes in playing loud brass notes.
But if I'm right,
this
you
is
say noisy band, but I think what they're actually playing from a musical point of view is a perfect fifth interval. Is that right? So you're one of the basic musical relationships in terms of pitch.
It's perfect fifth in Western music, but because it's not played by people who play Western music, some of the instruments are not the same fifth as. So what I've done is I've sort of blurred the fifth by putting, one instrument playing a quarter tone sharper or quarter tone flatter at certain points. So it sounds like a fifth, but it's like a sort of blurry fifth. And that's what you get when you hear them playing, the sort of blurry fifth. But that's where the word comes from in the second half of that.
The expectations.
Because of this religious idea. You're looking towards redemption or whatever it is in any particular religion. So it's an expectation of being blessed or being set free or whatever it is. Most religions have this kind of expectation for some.
So I think admittedly two very, very different elements in this, which are not really related as such.
No,
but just by that virtue, just having two elements which are very contrasting and a duality like that. It's a very powerful tool in artistic expression generally. We talk about sonata form in music. It's based on the idea of a first and a second subject, by definition contrasting. So just to take an obvious example of a lot of great traditional classical music is based on.
Yeah.
This concept of sonata form. But this is sort of in a totally different manner of musical expression. There's a parallel here with the use of two elements. So, I mean, the petrifying part, of course, of petrifying expectations is the ghoulish aspect, the ghosts which appear here and there.
And they make you feel petrified if you saw one, I'm sure.
And we made an effort, and I think to a certain extent, I think we did a pretty good job of creating ghost images which are quite scary.
I like the bit at the end that you've done.
And I think the ending bits...
It's got a bit of humour, but it also cuts off so you don't see the bit which is almost unimaginable.
Yes, we cut to black at the end. Because, again, I am in the, as we just said, performing the viola. I'm still in shot, and a ghostly image appears, and we suggest foul play might occur, but we cut it to black, which we thought that was quite a powerful way of doing that. Well, it's certainly a simple way of doing it.
Of course, but, in Greek theatre you never see bad things happen on stage. They always happen off the stage. So.
Yes. Well, one viola technique I'd just like to mention here.
So no viola players were harmed in this recording?
No, they survived, or he survived in this case, or I survived in this case. But that's the joy of doing it within the context of something which you're doing on stage. You can act that possibility. And the technique I haven't mentioned so far actually is the not constant use but very frequent use in some notable clusters of Kolyegno technique, which is when you use the wood of the bow to effectively hit the string. So again, it's not what a bow is designed to do. It's designed to vibrate a string with horsehair, but Kolyegno is a commonly used technique in certainly romantic music onwards, and it occasionally was used in classical music. I think, but not rarely, but it was known certainly. But it has a percussive effect which can actually evoke any number of associations. And getting back to our overall theme, the aesthetics of associations, I think this is just a very good one just to talk about a little bit, because it's an effect which is used many times in a number of these pieces, not just this one. But the beginning of Little Ghost Nebula has a very effective use of Kolyegno with very rapid demi-semi-quaver notes, or 30-second notes, I think they would also be known as, which creates this clattering sound, which on its own is benign and doesn't really... But as soon as you combine that with an image such as you said, an apparition on a wooden staircase in black and white from a time, which reminds you of a certain genre of movie. Yes. If that had been a colour picture, it wouldn't have had the same impact. That's right. But certainly that black and white image on the staircase with the Kolyegno was an effect.
Wasn't it also used with the bee?
I said in a number of other movements, and in the beehive movements, that was also used. And again, with a combination of some, what I've sort of heard is quite raspy sounding brass notes or chords. The combination of that had a brilliant effect, I thought, together with the image of a beehive and the workings and movement of bees. Again, nothing to do with ghosts, it's totally unrelated, but the same musical effect actually, but having the same power.
The last usage we won't talk about yet because it's in the last section.
And then there's the one which is in a later movement, which exactly. Yes.
Is there anything else to say about the Ficus?
No, I think that covers quite well. Again, it's not maybe the longest one. Again, thinking only back to Virgo, already I think out of the 6 so far, Virgo is the one which just feels bigger somehow. It just feels...
It's massive. It's a massive black hole, isn't it?
Yes. So number 7 is Trifid Nebula, Sagittarius. Now, Triffids, the word Trifid, or the plural Triffids, will conjure up in almost everyone's imagination the famous book, and then made into a movie, The Day of the Triffids. There's no escaping it. But I would assume that the Trifid Nebula was named that a long time before that book.
It's a Messier object, but I can't remember which number. It's divided into 3. it's tripartite, trifid. It's the tri of the three. And I just divided up the orchestra into three sections which move in different times and then the viola also plays these tripartite chords as well. So
yes.
the three is
or triple stopping in parlance of viola string playing parlance, yes.
And of course, again, I unfortunately can't remember the phrase we came up for this, but they're very important. The Sagittarius is the archer, and the archer fires the arrow. And the arrow is like the arrow that keeps going through time. The time's arrow. Yeah.
Yes.
But I think there was a phrase around that which we came up, but I can't remember what it was.
With this, the all-encompassing power of the animus.
Oh, the animus.
So this is a counterpart, if you'll remember back to number 4.
Yeah.
So Virgo was the all-encompassing power of the anima, which you explained, and this one is the all-encompassing power of the animus.
Well, this is the masculine then, isn't it? The arrow, the forward gesture, rather than the receiving gesture of, well, it's a sucking gesture with a black hole, but that receiving thing of the anima, now we've got the arrow flying through time, which is like the animus, the constantly going forward, which is much more of a masculine, I'm not talking about male, female here, but a masculine feeling. And then this video, instead of using triffids, like out of some B movie from the 50s of John Wyndham's novel, we decided, didn't we, to use carnivorous plants.
Right.
The carnivorous plants, like, I think there is a Venus flycatcher in there somewhere, but
I don't think we used that image actually. In this, I don't use Venus
particularly
flycatcher, but
enormous plants. They're called picture plants.
yes.
And they get the insect to come in, they stick, they fall down into the water, and then they go.
Yes.
Like that.
I mean, when I saw them, and I mean, this is a very brass-heavy piece. It has all the regular brass instruments, I believe, you use in a conventional orchestra. Is that correct?
Euphoniums,
It has,
tubas,
yeah, but it has trumpets, horns, and trombones. And of course, one of the images we used of one of these plants happened to be yellow. And yellow, it's not gold, but I mean the shape of it and the colour of it really reminded me instantly of the bells that you have with all of the brass instruments, where the sound comes out of a brass instrument.
But these plants are the biggest plants on the planet, I think, well, one of the biggest. They're huge and they fill with water, and then that traps the insects into it. And there's a rather tragic scene in which maybe one insect was harmed in the creation of these videos, but the poor thing falls in and probably drowns and gets digested. But the reason I think partly why we chose these plants is they could be alien. It could come off a planet we'd never even found before. Yes. They look like alien beings almost. They're not like, a lily or a dandelion.
No.
They're completely different looking creatures. So that's why I think we chose them.
And I think
triffids.
It's interesting that a lot of people realise that there are such plants in the plant kingdom, but actually, a lot of the time, forget that.
Yes.
And actually, even doing this video, I sort of reminded myself, oh yes, there are plants which behave like animals, catching their prey. Yeah. With in the Venus flytraps case, something which is like a jaw and a mouth.
It's a trap, isn't it? Really.
Quite incredible phenomena in nature. But again, just that image was too strong to resist, and so any consequent association with the triffids, as in the day of the triffids, is very hard to avoid in this. But I think in the spirit of our marrying of sound and image in this project, I think it's actually turned out to be a very effective video, and again, one which ranks alongside the other 8
musically,
in terms of its
of course,
quality.
it's probably formally the most simple. You've got this massive chords which are a bit like a sort of not a hymn, but
not chorale, but
chorale,
it's got slow moving, clear chords.
And then you've got some music, then the chorale sort of, it doesn't repeat, but it's similar music, then more different music, and at the very end, the viola plays at the end something that's similar to what it's played in the first two, but with much more decoration and little notes and melismata, so it's a kind of a 3-part form as well. It's the simplest in terms of form, I think.
Yes, agreed. And again, just in terms of the viola, just one A4 page as opposed to two, which a lot of the other pieces are. Mm-hmm. And so we feel as though we created sort of, when we assign these short phrases to the pieces, an element of symmetry to the whole cycle by having to say number 4 Virgo and number 7 as referring to the anima and the animus respectively. Mm-hmm. It's just a pleasing kind of symmetry that we like to put into multi-movement works. Yeah. So that's all to the good. Number 8, so the penultimate one, is Helix Nebula, Aquarius. And Helix Nebula, we were all very aware of the developments in DNA science of late and the imagery. And so again, this was a gift in terms of the wonderful film footage we were able to find, as well as still images, with the rotating helix, DNA strands, and in musical terms, could you describe how you achieved that? Because you did it very well. And again, I mean, if I were to think, just play a scale endlessly from do, re, mi, fa, so, and so on in a loop, that's one way you could create the idea of a helix or a rotation. But in your case, how would you describe what you did?
I remember the phrase we used to describe this section. It's rotation and mutation. So there's this rotating helix, the double helix of DNA, and mutation, which is what happens when genes combine and there's a mistake and something different happens. And actually it's, again, this one formally is quite simple, but you have a theme, if you like, not a word I would use, but it's a kind of theme, and it's a 12-note row in actual fact. I'm not a serial composer as such. I have in the past dabbled, but I'm not a serialist, definitely not a total serialist. But there are 12 different notes of the scale placed in wildly different what's the word you use? Registers of the instrument. Yes. And they rotate and mutate through the whole piece. But this piece is quite unusual in that there's one page on which is written all the information you would need to mutate this thing many more times. Different instruments have different things that they can mutate over the different mutations. And then there's a final page, which is the apotheosis at the end. So actually it's a piece without any specific length. You could play just what's written. You've got the theme, then you've got the first mutation, and then the second to the 258th mutation is all on one page. And every time you do it, it could be different. The viola soloist is encouraged to improvise, but mutate their material every time differently. Yes. In fact, you recorded 3 mutations, didn't you?
Yes.
We'd only used one in the video, but so it's this rotating, mutating object that sort of could go on forever until the final page, which is when it sort of stops. But it's actually a good metaphor for the way that I write lots of music, not just this piece or this movement section. It's that each section of a piece or each discrete area of a piece has its own genetic code, if you like, a musical genetic code. And I introduce this with young musicians, even if I'm teaching about some theory, that the genetic code of a major scale is tone, tone, semitone, tone, 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 semitone, and you can start that on any note and you'd find a major scale. So that's the kind of genetic code of a major scale. And so, but you can do that with your piece as well. There are certain intervals that you can use to make the piece hang together, rather than just be some random series of notes that could be anything.
Yeah.
And it's fairly related to a Xenakis technique called sieves. It gives a feeling to the piece which would be different if it was a different set of values. He calls it a sieve, which is odd because that's what you put tea through, isn't it? But anyway, his phrase. Anyway, well, I suppose it's a kind of filter. A sieve is a filter, isn't it? So it filters out. So in a way, I write music through a series of different filters for each piece. So each piece will be different, because otherwise it might just all sound random, mightn't it? Like you chose that note and then that note and this note and that note. And of course, total serialist. I grew up loving Webern, who wasn't himself a total serialist, but he inspired the Boulesian sort of total serialism. He uses the different registers in a very special way. It's not all the tone row is just these 12 boring notes in the same register. He uses them to make beautiful sort of filigree patterns and
right. Yes.
So that describes Helix, I would say. It's not a tribute to Webern, of course, but he's always there somewhere in the background as a. I mean, if I want to relax, most people would listen to, I don't know, Frank Sinatra, but I like to listen to Webern's string trio or piano variations.
Right.
I find it relaxing to hear those amazing filigree sounds, like almost on the edge of hearing quite often. So
from my point of view as a performer, just before I forget, the idea of the mutation and provided the opportunity for improvisation within a very controlled and defined set of parameters, not free improvisation, but as following, as you said, the tone row, which was just used in starting, I think, on A natural.
Yes,
and then
coming back to it as well.
And then I think it featured again one of my favourite intervals in music as a listener, is the tritone, either a diminished fifth or a augmented fourth.
Well,
so maybe not every single interval in this was a well, by definition it couldn't be, because you'd only end up with 2 notes in the tone row.
Exactly.
But 2 or 3 of them certainly, and I enjoyed playing with that, playing in the sense of improvising from one specified note to the next specified note, using various trills or mordants or slides, or again the extended vibrato idea which I discussed earlier, together with pizzicato as well as arco, and yes. So I did actually record 3 mutations which I really enjoyed, and when we watched them through again, actually I really wanted to use
all of them,
so we chose one of them, and we'll keep the other 2 maybe for another video later, because I'd just gotten to the end of recording, towards the end of recording all 9, this is number 8 we're talking about now, without stopping. So all of the ones that I've talked about so far that we've edited into the videos, in terms of the viola video recording and audio recording, was done as one take. I mean, I stopped in between each piece for a few seconds and turned a page, but I didn't do any editing. This is, as I say, it's for around 45 minutes of unedited viola playing. Admittedly, it's not going to be absolutely perfect, but I was very pleased that it was pretty close to the score when I was looking back at and listening back to it. I'm just saying that when it got to number 8, I was fully into it, or I already was by number 4, I think, certainly. If not earlier, but by number 8, I really was, and so I'll just say that that mutation passage is something I remember doing, because I really was in full flight. I think I can safely say that. I was uninhibited, and I was just using my imagination without any obstacles of doubt or not quite sure what to do next, which is always a challenge of improvisation, especially as a classical musician, who don't actually do that as we read notes on a page most of the time.
Yes, yeah.
Predetermined.
It's very impressive.
Notation. So that's a highlight, certainly of that one, maybe of the whole 9 with Helix. Okay.
Yeah, this is another one which the constellation never appears in our video.
Right. Okay.
Aquarius never appears.
No.
The water carrier.
But in many of them, the constellation does.
Yes.
Yeah. And again, impossible to include all the elements that are suggested by all of the titles.
In fact, visually, the best one, I think, of the constellations is the couple on a mountain looking up at Gemini in the sky.
Yes,
that's number 2.
That's number 2, Gemini, isn't it? Yes, that's right.
Very arresting image, that.
Yeah, absolutely. And the final piece in some notable clusters, as it stands at the moment, certainly, is entitled Skull Nebula, Cetus. So quite an ominous sounding way to end any kind of cycle. Skull Nebula, Cetus, and it was the last video we edited, and we realised that we'd done 8. Again, I think they're all of equal value. I don't think anyone particularly stands out. Quality.
I think they're equal quality.
I mean, in terms of quality, of the production, in the video and the music that we put together. And Skull Nebula, could you just describe because there's just one image that you think of, skull, that's it. Can you just describe in the video, how do we maximise the way of making that look original, instead of just putting a skull in the image?
Just going back to what you just said, this would probably be the final piece of a full 14.
Right, so the final of 14.
Because Cetus is only, the sun is in Cetus, which is the whale or the sea monster, for only one day. In fact, it's only a few hours on one day in the year, March the 14th. So it would go from Aries through to Cetus. So there are 5 more to do to have one in each constellation anyway.
Yes.
And yes, so the skull, well, one of the most iconic images of the skull is Damien Hirst's.
Right.
It's got a funny title, I can't remember the name of the piece. It's something about belief in God or something. It's an odd title for this sculpture. But he's basically encrusted a skull with diamonds. So it's worth hundreds of thousands of pounds. So of course we had to use
it's an iconic modern image, most people will recognise that.
But this piece, apart from the skulls, which do play quite a good role in this video, is actually dominated by the constellation this time. We've got whales almost everywhere. There's the whales bubbling up the water to get the fish up to the surface from on top aerially, which looks beautiful. And they make this Fibonacci spiral in the water, Fibonacci series spiral, which of course
it looks like the scroll of a viola.
The scroll of the viola on the top.
Which, thinking about it, and this is the first time that had just made that connection with me, we could very well have used that as the scroll of the viola with the shape of the water bubbles made by the whales.
Yeah.
But it's a universal in nature, the Fibonacci series, as many people have learned more and more recently. That mathematical sequence applies to, I think, any growth pattern in nature.
I use it a lot.
So,
use it, the Fibonacci rhythmic patterns, as did Yanis Xenakis when he was alive, and other mathematical things like the I function and the E function. Anyway, and then there are whales doing this wonderful ballet in the water, is another one, and then there's a whale tail disappearing under the water. So we use footage of whales a lot in this one.
A lot of nature.
It's
so good to. In fact, all of the moving images in this are nature. In fact, it's all of the sea-based, as you say, whales, but also actually a human, a lady swimming, as it were, a mermaid, but actually a woman swimming through water, as well as the whale image. But that's all water-based or sea-based, should I say, in terms of the moving imagery.
Returning to the theme of the piece overall, I think one thing we forgot to mention at the beginning is that if you look at the layout of the orchestra, if you like, and the viola soloist walks around during the piece in a sort of pattern.
In the stage plan, the proposed stage plan.
It's left so the viola soloist can walk through. And the viola soloist is the traveller, if you like, in the universe, going around looking at these amazing objects and absorbing them. And this swimmer is almost like that lone traveller, but underwater this time. She's the underwater traveller.
Yes.
Free in the water, like you would be if you were floating in space.
So yes, travelling, wandering.
Yes.
Searching.
Well, I think of
maybe never actually, maybe always knowing that you're never going to find out all of the answers to those big questions, which, as the famous saying goes, the ultimate answer to the ultimate question, and so on. And I think that's where we all are in those terms, and we all recognise that. And then this piece, I think that's the overriding theme of this piece, isn't it? Mm-hmm. And again, as you say, that proposed stage plan, where in this case myself, the soloist, would walk around, maybe not constantly, but certainly through the sections as a reflection of that, rather than being stationary in the conventional sense of being a concerto performer or a solo performer on a stage in front of an orchestra. But what that will require, though, of course, is possible, but it's going to be a challenge, is either to memorise the piece, because I can't actually walk around unless I had one of those stands which they'd use in a marching band, which I suppose is a possible option. But again, the association of that is too obvious.
And it would also be difficult to do that properly.
But because of the, again, we're talking about outer space and connecting to not science fiction, but certainly many elements of science, and the science is of perhaps using some kind of stage costume. Again, I'm not going to dress up in tails and a bow tie for this. As one option. I'm not going to dress casually, but we've had a few thoughts about, without overdoing it, some kind of a costume which would be appropriate to the thing. And one of those ideas might be also very practical, to use even some glasses, as we know glasses now, where you can actually have images visible in front of you and the two lenses of the glasses. As in virtual reality gaming, that's now it's not something I'm involved in much at all actually, but very widespread, isn't it? And that's been around for a few years. So that kind of technology is something that we're thinking about. That would be for the live, when we get around to actually fully producing this as a performed piece.
Just to return quickly to the theme of the Wanderer, it's basically the subject of a lot of my favourite literature, going back to the Canterbury Tales were wanderers. Chaucer, there's Dante, the Divine Comedy, where he goes on this journey through hell and then purgatory and heaven. Of course, there's Don Quixote, who travels. It's a road movie basically. And then of course there's Faust, goes down into hell in Goethe's Faust and wander. The idea of
Wotan is a wanderer,
and also
a very big wanderer.
Wanderer, the wanderer fantasy. It's a big theme, this idea of
questioning and
searching and moving.
It is to do with that, isn't it? It is about that eternal.
That's what this piece is kind of about.
So it's a modern take on that theme, which
it's a long-running theme.
Contemporary take on this idea. So
we're also thinking of using holograms, weren't we, in a live performance?
If we can.
The images from the space on project, or even in a planisphere. That'd be not planisphere. It's called a planetarium. That'd be great, wouldn't it?
Well, just on a final point, you mentioned the planetarium, the one that at the time I knew very well, just because I'm a Londoner, as the planetarium next to Madame Tussauds, which itself is not very far away from the Royal Academy of Music.
Which is where
just to tie up our presentation today and our introduction to some notable clusters. You started the conversation at the Royal Academy of Music, didn't you?
Right, yes.
I just mentioned that because
just down the road.
Planetarium was just down the road, and unfortunately that doesn't exist anymore.
Oh, it's gone.
The planetarium, as I think, unless it closed to be refurbished, I don't think, like the Royal Academy itself was, I don't know if it's closed, but it's certainly refurbished very extensively many years ago. I believe that planetarium no longer functions, which would be a great shame.
But there's a good one in Bangkok.
But elsewhere, of course, there are. And it's a piece that we think could be introduced in a number of different locations and situations. So as well, I started, I think, this introduction by saying, because of these videos, we watched them, we think they already stand as little homemade classics of this type of fusion, this type of not storytelling, but sort of idea conjuring, marrying of music and image. Which again, I think you mentioned that the installation idea was a wonderful one. I think setting for these 9 videos.
Well, I've worked with quite a few contemporary artists on installation work.
Yes.
But yes, it's very enjoyable and interesting to do that. But in this case, we're the artists as well as the musicians.
Yes.
The aesthetics of association.
The aesthetics of association and some notable clusters.
Yes.
Composed by Marcus Tristan, performed by myself as Viola Soloist. And after that extensive description, we very much hope you now enjoy watching them. I think they're best watched one after another, not as a symphony, but as a
sequence.
as a sequence which is as long as a substantial symphony.
Yeah.
So I think in those terms,
And wearing headphones is probably better than.
And because of the quality of the music and the audio, it is essentially first and foremost a piece of music. The quality of the headphones, sound system that you listen to this on, as with all great music, of course, will make all the difference.
Absolutely. Yeah.
So and there are so many details in the musical writing of Marcus Tristan. Very intricate. I mean, I'm fully aware that many details I haven't noticed yet. It's that type of music. It's not.
A lot of it also gets lost because I tried to make sure the viola was to the fore.
Yes, well, all of this comes into play, as we all know, in all, well, not all, but much, certainly orchestral music, ensemble music, where balance is a never-ending.
And in the live performance, that'll be a big challenge, the balance, especially in Virgo, this crushing, warping black hole.
But with the right engineer and the right equipment, these things are possible.
It'll go swimmingly, as they say.
We hope you're enjoying some notable clusters, and we'd very much like to hear from anyone who has any comments about them and any feedback. So thank you very much for watching and listening. Okay, and thank you, Marcus.
Thank you, Daniel.
Good night. So
and Happy New Year.
Happy New Year.